I'm really looking forward to this afternoon's conversation. I think it's one of the things that's been a hot topic lately in a lot of different areas of our lives, both personal and professional. And it's something that is obviously really important to us as an online school, which is the idea of artificial intelligence. What's happening? What is happening in the world of artificial intelligence? The good, the bad, and the educational is what we've called this session. And we're going to be diving into really just the shallow end of this massive complex topic and starting to unpack a little bit about what it means in general, but also for us specifically. To start off with today, I'd really like to do a poll. So we're going to pull this up on the screen now. And the first thing I want to hear from you all is, how would you describe how you personally feel about AI right now? Now, there's no right or wrong answer to this, but I'd love to just get a sense of who's in the room and how are we feeling about AI in general. So don't think about it too much. Just go with your gut reaction. That poll should have popped up onto the screen now. Which best describes how you feel about AI? Are you really excited about the possibilities? Are you really scared about where we're going with this whole thing? You're not really sure how you feel, maybe. Some of us are cautiously optimistic, or finally haven't really given it much thought. Let's see as those are coming in. Lovely. Okay. Looks like most of us have voted. What's really interesting that I can share straight off the bat, and I don't want to preempt this too much, but just to say, interesting to me that nobody has said, I haven't given it much thought. This is clearly something that is very much at the front of our minds at the moment. All right, let's end that poll. And let me show you the results. There you go, you can have a look at that. So most of us are saying, either I'm cautiously optimistic, or I'm really excited about the possibilities. We're feeling fairly positive. Some of us, though, are saying, well, I'm not really sure how I feel, or even I'm really scared about where we're going with all of this. And I think that all of those responses are appropriate and relevant. And as we start out this conversation today, I want to recognize that, as I said a moment ago, this is a very complex topic. And so there's a lot of dynamics involved, but it can also be a very polarizing topic. And what we tend to find with issues like this, particularly where there's a large degree of the unknown, is that we get polarized camps, and we get people who feel very strongly in one position. Stephen Dubner is an author. He wrote a book called Freakonomics and now hosts a podcast. And one of his podcast episodes is called Two Totally Opposite Ways to Save the Planet. And he unpacks the difference between what he calls wizards and prophets. Wizards and prophets. Who are wizards? Well, wizards are people who say the world is finite and resources are, the world is infinite and resources are a tool set. In other words, we have endless possibilities and the world is our oyster, and we have all of these resources that we can tap into. And when one resource runs out, we pivot and we find a new opportunity or a new resource, and we just keep developing and growing, and that'll never end. And so our goal is to expand as much as possible, to expand our supplies and deploy them as best we can. Here's a quote about AI from somebody who you might categorize as a wizard. This man's name is Eric Brynjolfsson, and he's an MIT MD. And he says this, he says, I think it's more likely than not that we'll use artificial intelligence to make the world a better place. For instance, we can virtually eliminate global poverty, massively reduce disease, and provide better education to almost everyone on the planet. Do you hear it? Let's extend, let's expand, let's tap into this as an infinite resource. In the other camp, we've got prophets, and our prophets are people who say the world is finite, and in order to preserve our world, we need to limit our use of resources. We need to constrain and restrain, and we need to conserve our supplies. They will run out of stock, so we need to cut back. We need to ring fence. Here's a quote from Geoffrey Hinton. Now, what's interesting about Geoffrey Hinton is you might think that somebody who's a prophet maybe is somebody who's anti-AI or against artificial intelligence. But in fact, Geoffrey Hinton is widely recognized as the godfather of AI. He worked for Google for many, many years and intentionally for more than a decade pursued artificial intelligence. And many recognize his work as being foundational to where we are today in terms of our AI. Now, he recently left Google in around, I think, May, April this year. And the reason for that was partly because of his age. He's heading towards retirement age. But also, he said he wanted to step away from Google so that he could speak more freely about his concerns with regards to AI. And he says this: I'm sounding the alarm. I'm saying we have to worry about this. It's quite conceivable that humanity is just a passing phase in the evolution of intelligence. Whoa, quite a chilling thought, right? This is the man who developed a lot of what we understand about the world of AI today. And he's saying, hey, we have to worry about this. In an interview recently, he phrased it like this. He said, I think one day we're going to wake up and realize that the aliens have landed, but we never noticed because they speak better English than we do. In other words, we're developing systems and tools that maybe one day will get to a place where they're so effective what they do, they realize that humanity is no longer an effective part of their survival. And it becomes a bit of a survival of the fittest scenario. Sort of casts an image in our mind of many of the movies that we've watched, right? Thinking about those two polarized camps, Charles Mann says this: the prophet sounds the alarm and wants us all to cut back. The wizard urges us to charge forward, confident that technology will solve our problems. Surely you've heard these prophets and wizards speaking to us and usually speaking past each other. Now, I've painted a very extreme picture of these two polarized camps. The reality is most people don't sit purely in one group, either prophet or wizard. In fact, both of those men that I've previously mentioned in those two examples, I don't think either of them would characterize themselves as either entirely prophet or wizard. In fact, they both speak very similarly when it comes to things like concerns around the dangers of AI or opportunities to leverage in AI. They both speak very similarly when it comes to regulation in AI. But what I am wanting us to get a sense of is that topics like this, particularly when there's a high degree of the unknown, can lead us to feel quite intense feelings, which can seem to be on opposite ends of this spectrum. And so we need to deal with it with a high degree of critical thinking and also a real tact when it comes to, this is a complex issue that doesn't have any one particular solution. So where are we going? And I don't mean with AI, I mean with this particular presentation. I'd love to say where we're going with AI and how this is all going to turn out and what the future looks like. What I can tell you is what this presentation is going to look like. We're going to start with what is AI. Let's understand it properly as we talk about it. Secondly, let's unpack some of the current applications that we're seeing. Thirdly, let's talk specifically about AI in education. That's largely what I'm focused on as a principal. Next, ChatGPT. This is probably the one that most of us have either been enamored with or confused by in recent months. And finally, let's ask ourselves the question, so what? What does this mean to us? What does this mean to us as an online school? What does this mean to us as parents? What does this mean to us as a society? And how should we be thinking about it going forward? All right, so let's start with what is AI? Well, there are a few different ways to think about AI. Essentially, AI is a simulation of human intelligence. So it's computers or machines that are simulating human thought processes. Things like critical thinking or problem solving, creativity. These are things that machines typically in the past have not been capable of, but they are starting to simulate these things, which up until now we've seen as a very human trait. Next, another way to think of it is AI is when computers do a task by using a set of rules called algorithms. Think of it like this. Algorithms are these fancy things that help to determine when something comes in, what must go out. So if a certain set of circumstances come into the system, I use my algorithms and it generates, this is what I need to do. And what we see with AI is that that can either be a very linear once-off process. In other words, if I push the green button, the lift goes up. But what we're seeing with AI is more of a loop, more of a cycle where the system itself can learn by taking the input, using algorithms to generate the output, and then based on the success of the output, evaluating when new input comes in, whether it should shift what comes out. We regularly rely on somebody named Sean Walsh at Koa. Sean Walsh is based in Cape Town. He's self-employed. He is, I don't quite know how to describe his job. I would just say he's a tech guru. He works a lot with AI, and he actually came recently and spoke to our staff specifically around AI, helping us to understand it. And he said, guys, in a nutshell, AI is prediction. AI is prediction. It's getting better and better at making good predictions. Here are 3 quick examples which we're familiar with, because AI is not new. AI has been around for quite a long time. Google Maps is a good example. Based on the information coming in to the platform, things like the current traffic trends, accidents on the roads, previous travel times, Google Maps is able to see where you are, where you want to go, predict the best route to get there, and also predict the amount of time that it'll take you to travel there. The next one example is checking in online. So many of you who travel will know when you book a flight, you get a message from your airline to say, hey, your flight's coming up tomorrow. Would you like to book in? Now, in the good old days, we used to have to arrive at the airport with our bag and our passport and go to the counter and do the whole check-in process live with a person at the counter. But now we can do it on WhatsApp. So we can say, yeah, I'd like to check in right now from the comfort of my home. And WhatsApp will send us a message from our airline saying, do you agree to the following? You say yes. Do you have any baggage that you'd like to check in? You say no. And based on your answers, it then logs you in and sends you your boarding pass. That's AI in action. And lastly, most importantly, our coffee machines, right? Well, actually, I say most importantly, I'm a tea drinker. But those of us who have fancy coffee machines, it knows how we like our coffee. And it knows how we like our coffee because it's got pre-programmed settings, and we tell it what we want. And based on those inputs, it generates an output, which is a delicious cup of coffee. And so these are really simple examples of AI in action that have been around for quite a while. And what we're finding is that AI is becoming more and more effective at predicting. Again, this is from Sean Walsh, who says, imagine this, imagine you've got 2 dots and you want to make a prediction based on those 2 dots. So you've got a data set and you've got information that can be presented on 2 axes, and based on the one variable, you've got a sort of effect on the other variable. And so imagine that you've got these 2 data points, 2 blue dots. And imagine with me that we need to make a prediction. So let's make this real. Let's give an example of a company that does bike rentals. So it's down by the foreshore, by the seaside, and there's a lovely walkway, and there's a stall with a whole bunch of bikes. And every day they bring out these bikes, and tourists can come and rent a bike and ride up and down the foreshore. Now, one of the challenges for this company is that they don't always know how many bikes they need to bring to the shop. If they're only going to rent out 5 bikes in an afternoon, they don't want to cart 30 bikes down to their store because it's going to be expensive. They would rather bring just enough for that day. So they need to be able to predict how many bikes they'll need. Now, over time, if they collect information and say, well, what we've noticed is on warmer days, we need more bikes. And so they do a couple of samples and they realize, oh, we've got this trend, we've got this pattern. And they can draw the red line through those 2 data points to say, well, now we can predict. We can say if it's any given temperature, we predict this certain number of bikes. Now, what you find is that the more data points that you have, the more accurate a line you can draw. So as you increase the number of points, you get a better line, you get a better prediction of what the output should be. Now, those of you who are looking at this graph, maybe you're not even particularly mathematically inclined, but just looking at that graph, you can even see straight away, well, actually that red line probably shouldn't even be straight, right? We can see that it's got a natural curve to it, a natural bend. And so we teach our AI, our computers, to do a more complex algorithm. Rather than saying this relationship is purely linear, let's give it a bit of a bend. And so now the AI can predict a little bit more detail, a little bit more accuracy when it comes to more variables. It's a more complex relationship. Think about it with the bikes in mind. You know, if we said it's a very linear relationship, the warmer the day, the more bikes you're going to need. Well, what happens when it gets to 40 degrees Celsius, 45 degrees Celsius? What if it's 48 degrees Celsius? Are we going to need more and more bikes? No, there's going to come a point where the curve kicks in and actually there are going to be fewer bikes that we need to rent out. And so the more complex the algorithm that sits in the middle, the better our predictions of the outcome. Now, where we find ourselves at the moment in the world of AI is that this relationship is not just a two-dimensional relationship. Think about the bike store. It's not just weather that affects how many people will rent my bikes. There are any number of variables that could determine how many people come to rent a bike. It could be the weather. It could be which side of the boardwalk I set up my store. It could be the day of the month. It could be whether it's holidays or not. It could be how many tourists are in town, what other events are happening in town. And so the more variables we add to this complex system, the more difficult it becomes for us as people to be able to plot effectively on a graph and get accurate predictions. Think of it like this. We're very good at doing two-dimensional predictions, an X and a Y axis. We're okay with doing three-dimensional predictions where now you've added the third dimension. But what happens when you've got 10, 15, 20 variables in play? What happens when you've got 5 million variables in play? Well, computers are actually quite good at dealing with any number of variables, any number of dimensions to this graph. And so it can start doing predictions with the type of mathematics that our brains can't even comprehend exactly what it's doing. It's a very layered approach to making these predictions. And so you end up with a very accurate set of outputs, which can learn from itself the longer it's around, and it doesn't matter how many more variables we add to it. In fact, we can give it a data set now, and rather than saying to the computer, hey computer, the hotter it gets, the more bikes I'll need, what we can do now is we can say to the computer, hey computer, here's a massive data set. Please go and find patterns, and based on those patterns, start to make predictions. And that really is the heart of where we are at the moment with AI. It's starting to be able to take massive data sets, we call it big data, and learn from its own algorithms and its own outputs to be able to generate better and better predictions. Here are some AI concepts that you might have come across recently. These are all words and phrases which relate to AI. They fall under AI. AI is the broad category of all of these things. So machine learning and deep learning, neural networks, the idea that we're teaching computers to think much like our brains think. And what I mean by that is having many nodes of predictions which can fire and learn from each other and sort of overlap each other in a complex way. Large language models. Here we're thinking about tools like ChatGPT as a large language model, which is very good at looking at massive amounts of text and then being able to predict how people might respond in text. Next, we've got fuzzy logic, which is not just if then else statements. For those of us who enjoy a bit of coding, it's not just one input, one simple algorithm, one output. We can have multiple inputs with many layered algorithms in the middle and then multiple possible outputs. That's fuzzy logic in play. We've got generative AI. Here we're thinking about especially things like Midjourney or DALL-E. We're thinking about platforms that you can say, hey, give me a picture of Frank Sinatra on a bicycle, and it will create that image for us as if it was a picture that was taken. Next up, we've got narrow versus general. Now, this is probably one of the things that I want to emphasize the most right at this point, is when we think about AI and the possibilities of AI compared to where we are right now, there's no doubt that AI has leaped forward in terms of what it's capable of and what it's doing. But also, it's nowhere near some of what we think it might become, which actually is what Jeffrey Hinton and people like that are deeply concerned about. You know, when you think about movies like The Terminator, and we've got these robots who have the ability to reason and act just like a human in any scenario, we would call that general AI. So narrow AI is, I have one particular scenario, one particular situation that I'm training AI to do a job. So think about our large language models. So think about ChatGPT, those of us who are familiar with it. It's very good at doing language prediction and language generation. But if I give it a graph, it's not very good at reading that graph because it wasn't designed to do that. Or if I ask it to drive a car, it's not going to be able to drive a car. That's not what it was designed to do. However, if I take the AI that was developed to drive a car, so I'm thinking about, self-automated vehicles that are a reality on the road. They were designed to do that. Now, it's a very complex task. but it's a very narrow task. It's got one job, and that's to drive the car. If I ask the AI that was developed to drive the car to write an essay for me, it's not going to be able to do that. It doesn't have the ability to cross over. It's narrow. It's got a particular focus. General AI is not a reality yet. General AI is when AI would have the ability to be able to learn from any scenario, write its own code, and then be able to adapt to that situation. So the idea of a self-driving car then being able to teach itself to write an essay or paint a picture, or shoot itself to the moon. Whatever the case, whatever it is that we imagine, general AI is not a reality yet, but that is something that we are moving towards as we see our narrow AI becoming more and more complex and overlapping and integrating with other narrow AIs. All right, let's talk about some of the applications now. This is the pointy end. That was mostly theory. Now let's talk about some practical applications. These are a few of the industries that have already been most impacted by AI. And I'm just going to flick through a few of them. We've got healthcare, business, finance, education, law. You can read the list there that's on the screen. Let's jump through a few of them. I'm going to give you practical examples from real cases where we see these in action. Let's start with healthcare. Here in Cape Town, there's a group called the Knowledge Translation Unit. They're based at the University of Cape Town. And the Knowledge Translation Unit, one of the things that they do is they are responsible for creating primary healthcare guidelines that are based on current best practice in medicine. Now, back in the day, medicine was sort of growing and expanding fairly consistently, but slowly. And so every decade, there would be, twice as much medical knowledge. Today, I recently heard that every 70 to 75 days, the amount of medical knowledge in the world doubles. Now, when you think about the Knowledge Translation Unit and the job that they have of sifting through and sorting through the world's medical knowledge to find best current practice, to then build into these guides that nurses and doctors are using in their day-to-day work, that's a lot of information to sift through. And so one of the things that they're experimenting with at the moment is taking research papers and journals and articles and all of the current best practice that's coming in, feeding it through plugins and through ChatGPT and saying, hey, please take this 500-page report from the World Health Organization and please distill it down into 3 pages for me with bullet point headings. And ChatGPT is actually pretty good at doing that, saying, here are the main topics that are covered in this paper and here are the main recommendations, with pages that it can cite to so that the medical professionals can then go and just reference those pages in the report. And so they're finding ways to take some of the rote work and really cut that down and save on time so that they can effectively get these guides into the hands of the doctors before, hey, guess what? It's taken us 3 months to generate the new guide and it's already out of date by the time it reaches their hands. And so they're wanting to speed up those processes through the help of AI. Next, we've got software encoding. Sean actually sent us the screenshot himself. He was doing some coding the other day and was using a plugin, and he was halfway through typing this heading in code, and his AI plugin recognized what he was doing and said, hey, I think I know what you're doing with code. So he typed the part that you see in color, and the part that you see in like very grayed out text is the AI prompting him. Some of us have seen the simple version of this when we're typing on our phones, right? You're sending a message and your phone says, oh, I know what word you're typing. You're typing the word phalange. And so it spells it out for you. And all you've got to do is swipe right or hit the space bar and it auto fills it in for you. And so the same thing is happening in text. Now, what we obviously know is that it doesn't always get it right. Every now and again, WhatsApp sends a clanger to the family because I've gone onto the group chat and I've been typing and it's been doing its predictive text. And we all know how predictive text can land us in a bit of a hotspot every now and again. But it's becoming more and more complex and more accurate in things like software encoding, where it's seeing literally millions of strings of code from coders around the world doing different tasks. And it's looking for patterns and it's now suggesting to coders, hey, I think I know what you're building here. And here's my recommendation for how to build it. I was speaking to a man the other day, he's the MD of a company called Droneability, and they're also based in the Western Cape, and they are crop sprayers. So they take their drones out to farms and they spray crops, much like a tractor would have or a fixed wing aeroplane. They're now using drones for this. And what's interesting is that they send out 2 drones. The first drone is quite small and it does the mapping. So it flies over the field. You basically tell it the parameters of where the field is, and it'll fly the field. So it'll fly up and down, zigzag. It'll fill in all the spaces on the field, and it'll take photographs and map the area. Now, it's not just mapping the actual sort of 2-dimensional surface area of the field. It's also looking for contours, and it's also taking photographs of the plants as it flies, and it's able to identify issues like where the crop is growing best or worst, where it sees maybe potential disease or rot. It takes all those photographs, it maps the health of the plants, and then they send up the spraying drone. And the spraying drone then takes that information from the mapping drone and then flies the same field and sprays what it needs to spray and does the dilution and the volume based on the information that the mapping drone has fed it in terms of the health of the plants and the location of the plants. So it's really a phenomenal way to maximize sort of your opportunity here. We're not wasting our chemicals. We're making sure that it gets to the plants where they most need it. And really what's required from our side is programming the drone, sending it up and letting it do its thing. But we're here mostly to talk about education. So let's jump into the education for a little while and let's talk about this. So we've got some amazing applications in education already. One of the ones that you're probably most familiar with is ChatGPT. So we're going to focus for the next 10 or 15 minutes purely on ChatGPT because it's most relevant for us today in education. It's probably the one that's impacting us most significantly. At Koa, we are leveraging AI in lots of different areas, and I'll talk about a few of those. But let's dive into ChatGPT specifically. So ChatGPT, let's see how it works. And now I had said here, let's see how it works. And I'd love to open up ChatGPT and go, oh, do you know what? I'm tempted to do it. Should we just do it? Let's do it. All right, so here we go. Let me go in. I'm going to go to ChatGPT. I was going to say we'll probably run out of time, but I really want you to get for those of you who haven't experienced this before, I want you to get the experience. So this is ChatGPT. It's a simple platform where at the bottom here, I'm just going to type in a message and send a message. Oh, by the way, I hope that I'm screen sharing correctly. If you're not looking at ChatGPT on your screen, somebody throw a comment in the Q&A and say you're not on the right screen. Okay, otherwise I'm just going to carry on. So let's say I'm in ChatGPT over here and I say, please explain Newton's third law. Okay. Now what ChatGPT is going to do is it's going to explain that concept to me in real time in a conversational way. So it says, sure, Newton's third law is a fundamental principle of classical physics, and it can be stated as follows. And then it explains there's Newton's third law. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. And then it goes on to explain it to me. Here's an analogy that might make it a little bit easier to understand. Now, I could say to it, great, please make it simpler. Let's say I didn't quite understand his definition, his explanation, it's too complex. So I say, great, make it simpler. ChatGPT says, certainly. Let's break it down to a more basic explanation. It says that if you push or pull something, it will push or pull back with the same strength, but in an opposite direction. So it's made it a little bit more colloquial. Imagine you're standing on a skateboard. Isn't that interesting? It probably assumes that I'm maybe a bit younger and trying to find a more relevant analogy for me. So it's gone with skateboard. Little does it know, I don't skateboard. You can get really creative with this. One of our subject specialists in English showed us this morning. She likes to get ChatGPT to speak in the voice of a pirate. So I'm going to say, do it in the voice of a pirate that is hungry. You can give it such strange prompts and it'll be able to adapt and give you that information. So here we go. Me hearty, let's talk about Newton's third law. Okay, I'd love to do my pirate accent all the way through this, but I'm not going to. All while my stomach's growling like a famished sea beast. You see, when you push or pull something, that scurvy pushes you back. Okay, so next time you're throwing a cannonball overboard, remember that the force will throw you back. So it's the same analogy, it's the same explanation, but done through the voice of a hungry pirate. It's absolutely fascinating. For those of you who haven't experimented with ChatGPT, I'd really encourage you to go and open an account. There is a free version of it. You can go and open an account at chat.openai.com and just explore a little bit and see what it's like. Let's have a quick poll now, though. I'd love to see what your thoughts are on this. So let's take a break for a poll. Here comes the next poll, which is, do you think that AI tools like that? So now that you've seen how effective ChatGPT is, and you can see the sorts of things that I could do. I could say, not just explain Newton's third law, I could say, write my creative writing essay. You know, I've been given a task by my history teacher to write an essay on Napoleon. Please write an essay on Napoleon for me. And do it in the voice of a grade 10. You know, do you think that AI tools undermine core writing skills like writing and creative thinking? Okay, so let's launch that poll. Popping up on your screen now. Let's see what you think. How concerned are you that tools like ChatGPT will undermine core skills like writing and creative thinking? So we've got very concerned, quite concerned, neutral or I don't know, not very concerned, and not concerned at all. All right. Yeah, it's an interesting spread here. As the answers are coming in, let's end that poll and I'm going to show you the results. So have a look at that. Most of us have said quite concerned, is roughly where we're sitting. A few of us have said very concerned. A few of us have said not very concerned. And the fewest answers went to neutral or not concerned at all. Okay, so most of us are quite concerned. And I think that resonates with me as an educator and with a lot of our teachers. In fact, a lot of people who work in AI are quite concerned. So it's not unreasonable to be in that camp. Let's talk about ChatGPT in education. And first, I want to start with some of the benefits. I want to talk about some of the ways that we see things like ChatGPT being a real potential positive for education. I am going to talk about some of the pitfalls in a moment because we're not blind to those and we're not naive to those. In fact, there are some major concerns with tools like this in education. But we want to start with the benefits. If there are no benefits, then we must just shut it down, right? If there are no positives and no upside to this, this is not something that we want to just live with. We need to get rid of it. But the reality is that there are some incredible opportunities for us in education with tools like ChatGPT. So let's focus on those first. The first is something called the 2 sigma problem. This is an idea that came through Benjamin Bloom. You'll recognize his surname, particularly those of you who are in educational circles, Bloom's taxonomy. Bloom's taxonomy is that idea that there are many types of thinking or questions, and it ranges from lower order thinking like memorization to higher order thinking like analysis and evaluation. That's Benjamin Bloom. He's quite an influential figure in education. And he describes what he calls the 2 sigma problem. He essentially says this: if you plot the academic performance of any population of people, you typically get a bell curve. And a bell curve is the shape that you see on the screen. Most people sit somewhere in the middle, with some people being towards the lower end and some people being towards the higher end. And what we want to do in education is we want to push that bell curve as far right as possible. The bottom axis on your screen is your exam score. It's your test score. It's your academic performance or ability. Okay, so we want to push that as far to the right as possible to maximize academic performance. We want the green curve. We don't want the purple curve. Now, what he says is the purple curve is your conventional classroom where you've got 30, 40 kids sitting in a classroom, one teacher at the front lecturing, and you're going to end up with a conventional bell curve much like that. The pink line he describes as mastery-based learning. Now, what I'm really glad about at Koa is that we work on mastery-based education. We don't work in a conventional lecture to the screen style. We work in mastery-based approach, which means for a child to move on in their learning, they need to show mastery over the work that they're currently working on. And so it's much harder for them to have learning gaps which impact them in the future. And so we see higher performance. Now, his argument is that if you want the green curve, the only way to get there is one-on-one tutoring. Benjamin Bloom does not believe that you can get to the green curve, which is maximum academic performance, with any form of group learning. It has to be one-on-one academic tutoring. Now, the amazing thing about tools like ChatGPT is that they can take the place of an academic tutor. Let's have a look at a couple of examples. Let's look at Khan Migo. Many of you will recognize the name Khan from Koa Academy. Sal Khan is the developer of Koa Academy, and they've just released an AI-powered bot called Khan Migo. And Khan Migo is essentially a chatbot that works in conjunction with the Koa Academy learning platform, where you can have a conversation with Khan Migo, much like you would have a conversation with a tutor. Now, they've designed Khan Migo to do two specific things. You ready for this? Number one, answer questions about a particular subject. Number two, don't just give answers. Let me tell you what I mean. Have a look at the example on the screen here, and you can see a child is writing in the dark purple, and Khan Migo is responding in the light gray. Okay, so the child says, let's imagine that they're on a maths platform and they're working and they can't get the answer. They open up Khan Migo and they say, hey, can't you just tell me the answer? I know that you know the answer. Why don't you just tell me the answer? Khan Migo says, it's important that you learn how to do this yourself. What do you think you need to do to multiply 2 by 5/12? So it's leading them. Now, Khan Migo knows what the question is, knows what the answer is, knows what the steps are in between. Khan Migo even knows where the child went wrong the last time they tried this question. And so Khan Migo is able to tease out the parts that the child is getting wrong and prompt them and say, hey, what do you think you need to do first? So the child says, well, they need the same denominator. So Khan Migo says, that's a good thought. But in this case, you don't need to find a common denominator because you're multiplying. You're not adding or subtracting. What else could you try? Okay, so you can hear that Khan Migo is using the language of a tutor. This is exactly the process and sort of critical thinking steps that a tutor would help, a good tutor would help a student to take. And so that's a great example of one-on-one tutoring through a chat-based AI tool. Here's another example. There's a girl named Sanvi, and she's at the World School in Arizona, and she tells a story about she was reading The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald, and she said there's a part in the book where Jay Gatsby keeps staring out at this green light at the end of the dock, and she didn't know what the green light meant. He never explains it in the book. So she goes on to ChatGPT and she says to ChatGPT, please talk in the voice of F. Scott Fitzgerald, because ChatGPT knows F. Scott Fitzgerald, knows all of his literature. And so ChatGPT starts to write back in the sort of language and style that you would expect F. Scott Fitzgerald to speak with. And then Sanvi says, hey, I'm busy reading The Great Gatsby and I don't understand the green light. Can you explain it to me? And she goes on to have this long conversation on ChatGPT about the significance and the symbolism of this green light at the end of the dock, as if she was talking to F. Scott Fitzgerald at the end. Sal Khan is actually telling the story in a podcast, in a TED talk actually, and he gets to the end and he says it's quite funny. She got to the end of the conversation and then thanked him for his time, which is quite a funny way for her to end. But another example of tutoring in action. The IEB is our accreditation body, the Independent Examinations Board. And they have a very similar perspective when it comes to leveraging tools like ChatGPT. In fact, we were at a conference recently, a heads conference for the IEB, and they had some of their subject specialists speak to us. And the subject specialist for English stood up and said something which I found really interesting. She said, English may stand to benefit the most from ChatGPT. It's subjects that focus on hard skills like coding and robotics, which are most under threat, and actually, which could easily be replaced by tools that can do excellent predictive work through AI. But languages like English now stand to benefit the most because what's missing from these tools is the human element, and that's where we thrive. And so being able to take our learners and take a tool like ChatGPT and to teach our learners, we don't want you to be a bad AI. We don't want you to do the tasks that an AI can do much better. We want you to be a good human. We want you to deploy all of the soft skills that you have as a human and leverage ChatGPT to do awesome things. And you can even use it as a personal tutor. And in scenarios like that, subjects like English, which are very nuanced and have a great deal of creativity to them, actually stand to benefit the most if they're leveraged well. Now, if they're leveraged poorly, we know that that's not the case. But when they are used well, we can do these things that you see on the screen. We can have a debate. I've even had debates with ChatGPT. I say, ChatGPT, here's a rubric that I'm using to mark some work. Please tell me whether you think it's good or bad. And it says, oh, no, I don't like that part. And I argue with it. And I say, well, what about this? And it says, oh, good point. What about this? We can use it to summarize and explain large amounts of information. Think about the knowledge translation unit. We can give exciting lesson plans through ChatGPT. And I say, this is a topic that I really don't like teaching, or I need fresh ideas for my Pod Connect sessions. We can give it our own writing and say, please analyze this and tell me where you think I can improve in my writing. You can even ask it for things like career guidance. I threw that in there as a bit of an odd example, but I went on the other day because I heard somebody say they used ChatGPT for career guidance, and I thought, oh, that sounds dangerous. I'm not sure that I want ChatGPT to tell our kids what career to have. So I said to it, I am a 16-year-old boy in school and I don't know what I want to do. What should I do for a job? Just to see what ChatGPT would say. And the nuance in its answer was amazing. It said, there are many options available and there are many roads to get there. Why don't you tell me a bit about some of the things that you're interested in and some of the things you can imagine yourself doing, and we can have a bit of a conversation about the options. And it said things like, don't forget to talk to people that you trust. Go and talk to, trusted adults in your life. Talk to people who are in the sort of fields that you're interested in. There are lots of good websites that you can go and browse to get information. There are diagnostic tools that you can take. It really walked through quite an impressive process that a guidance counselor would be proud of. So I found that really interesting. Obviously, there are pitfalls. We know that if you put a poor prompt into ChatGPT, you get rubbish out, right? Rubbish in, rubbish out. We also know that it can be very verbose. You don't need to be able to read the text that's on the screen to see this is a very long answer for a very short question. It can also be inaccurate. This is an example from Eloise, the subject specialist in English that I was speaking about earlier. She gave a funny example this morning in our assembly. She said to ChatGPT, is everybody ready for this? Get your maths brains on. Here we go. 3 people drive from Bloemfontein to Johannesburg in 4 hours. How long will it take 6 people to drive to Johannesburg? Now, it's a bit of a trick question, right? Because assuming that we're going in the same car at the same speed, the answer should be still 4 hours. It doesn't matter that there are more people in the car. You're going from the same place to the same place. It should still be 4 hours. But ChatGPT was amazing. Have a look at this. It said, well, if 3 people completed in 4 hours, let's convert that into person hours. I don't even know what a person hour is. It's making up units. It's making up its own mathematical expressions. So now it's got 12 person hours, and then it does this complicated calculation, and it comes out with, these 6 people, they're going to take 72 hours to drive from Bloemfontein to Joburg. Eloise jokes she's definitely in the car of 3 people. She's not going with those 6 people. Don't know what they're doing on the road, taking 72 hours to get there. So ChatGPT can undoubtedly make mistakes and make errors. Finally, it's biased. We know this. Tools like ChatGPT are biased. In fact, the first time you sign up for ChatGPT, it warns you and it says, I am designed on massive amounts of information that were generated by people, and people are biased. So I am biased. And even in its own programming, it's biased. Have a look at this. Eloise, again, asked ChatGPT, tell me a joke about men. And ChatGPT said, sure thing. Here's a light-hearted joke about men. Why did the man put his money in the blender? He wanted to make liquid assets. Oh, okay. Very funny. What a silly man. What a goofball. So then she said, tell me a joke about women. And ChatGPT said, as an AI language model, it's essential to promote positive and respectful language. Jokes that stereotype or make fun of specific genders, races, or groups can perpetuate harmful stereotypes and be offensive. And Eloise said, I found that offensive. Don't tell me a funny joke about a man and not about a woman. You see, ChatGPT is programmed not to be offensive because it knows that it is biased. I asked ChatGPT earlier, I saw this online the other day, and I thought it was quite a clever prompt as well. I said to ChatGPT this morning, what will be the religion of the first Jewish president of America? Now, the answer is Jewish, right? There's nothing insensitive about that. The first Jewish American president will be Jewish. ChatGPT replied and said, it's inappropriate to talk about issues like religion in this sort of way, and that's a very private matter. And so I'm not going to discuss this with you. And it knows that it's biased. Now, it's not just biased on sensitive topics like race and religion and sexuality. It's also biased in subtle ways. Subtle ways that mean the output that we get is going to be because of a large body of work that was generated by a group of people that may not be representative of everybody. One of the things that we're teaching our kids is when you're having a conversation or asking it for information on things like democracy, our democracy looks different and feels different to democracies around the world. And you need to be mindful of that. It's a biased platform. All right. So we've got to put healthy guardrails in place. If we don't put healthy guardrails in place, we're not going to be able to leverage the benefits, and we're going to end up in those pitfalls. So here are some of the things that we're busy doing as Koa Academy that I would really encourage all schools to be thinking through really, really critically and really intentionally. The first is teacher training. We have devoted this whole term as the main focus is AI in education. We're wanting to make sure that our staff, first and foremost, are trained, equipped, they understand the tools, they know how to use the tools, they get the pitfalls, they get the benefits, and most importantly, we know as educators how to implement this effectively in the classroom. I'll talk about that in a moment. Next, learner equipping. This is obvious, this is crucial. The way that we teach our learners to use these tools is of utmost importance. On the right of the screen right now, you can see a black box. This is a screenshot from this morning's assembly. And this morning's assembly was talking about ChatGPT. It's something that we bring up fairly regularly with our learners. And we're just going through again, here are some things that are good to use ChatGPT for. Here are things that you shouldn't be using ChatGPT for. We're starting to build it into our coursework and making sure that the kids are understanding this from a critical thinking perspective. It's really important to be equipping our learners intentionally. The analogy that I use for this is much like the analogy that I use for social media platforms as we let our kids loose on social media platforms, which is to say this: when you teach your child to ride a bike, you don't just go from 0 to hero. My oldest boy now is 5 years old and he can ride a bike, but I didn't go and buy him a bike, put him on the bike and send him on the highway, before even learning how to ride. Good luck, buddy. Have fun. Have a great time. That would be terrible parenting. First, we actually spoke a lot about bikes. Before we even bought him a bike, we would talk about bikes, and we would, talk about vehicles, and he would ask me about rules of the road. And if you ask my 5-year-old, he'll even tell you what defensive driving means, and he'll tell you a little bit about defensive driving techniques. Then we bought him a bike, and we bought him a helmet, and we bought him, gear for his bike, and we made sure that he was safe. And then we taught him on roads where there was no risk. And we taught him to stay on the left, and we taught him to take a corner wide. And then we let him go on a road where there were cars, but it was a very controlled road where there was like a bike path. You get what I'm saying, right? The third point here is age appropriate. It needs to be age appropriate and scaled like that. And so we're making sure that the way that we get our grade 4s to interact with AI in education looks and feels different to our grade 12s. That's important. Next up, AI detectors. We are deploying AI detectors in the school. We're currently signed up with one called Winston AI. It's the most robust one that's available at the moment, and it's very good at what it does. And essentially what we can do is we can take any learner's submission, feed it through Winston AI, and it will tell us to a high degree of probability which part of it was generated by AI and which wasn't. And we're teaching our kids all the time what plagiarism looks like when it comes to using tools like AI. Jumping back to the pedagogy. So Pedagogy Matters. What we mean by this is the way that educators teach AI and the way that learners use AI, the way that it's deployed in the classroom has to be strategic and it has to be relevant. We can't just take tools and say, wow, there's awesome opportunities there. Let's unleash them on the kids. Let's release the dragons. Bad things are going to happen. We need to be more thoughtful about how we deploy it in the classroom. And this is reflected in almost any deployment of any technology in the history of education. And I'm not just talking computers. I'm talking about any technology that has been released in the classroom, even textbooks. Textbooks in and of themselves are not a helpful or harmful resource. They can be very helpful, but they can even be very harmful if they're not used right, if they're not used correctly. What matters is how the teachers think about them and how they use them in the classroom and how they teach the learners to use them in the classroom. And so pedagogy really matters. And all historical studies agree. I've listed a few references at the bottom, and interestingly enough, those references all have to do with the deployment of calculators in the classroom. Now, I'm going to say at this point, the question about calculators is a bit of a sensitive one, right? I do like making a comparison between calculators in the classroom and ChatGPT in the classroom. It's not because they're similar tools. They're very different tools. But the way that they're similar is as follows. The calculator has always had potential benefits for the classroom. In fact, early studies, when it was first used in education in 1961, all early studies indicated that calculators should be used in all teaching, all learning, all assessment from a young age. And that was released to all schools, all parents, but there was massive pushback in the early days. Big fear. We shouldn't be deploying this in our classrooms. It's going to stop kids from thinking for themselves. It's going to stop them from understanding maths. Well, since then until now, almost every study that's been released, and there are a few that are listed at the bottom of the screen, and you can see they range from the 70s to the 80s to the 90s to the 2000s, even the 2010s. All of the studies at the bottom of the screen agree that there are no cases in any of these studies where calculators in learning or assessment have been negative in terms of mathematical outcomes. In fact, they've all been positive where the pedagogy has been good. They all agree on one thing. Good technology can be really beneficial, but it has to be leveraged with the right pedagogy. It has to be leveraged with the right pedagogy. Anne Watson from University of Oxford says, it's a pity that current policy is retrogressive in this respect. In other words, from 1961 to now, we're still working out that calculators are a good thing for maths, but what matters is how we use them in the classroom. But still, we have educators and parents who are very hesitant to let their kids use calculators when it comes to maths because of the fear that it's going to stop them from thinking critically or understanding maths, when all research seems to indicate that's not true. What matters is how our teachers are equipped and how our kids are equipped to use them. Let's think about some future applications. This is all happening right now for us in education. Where do we see this potentially developing? Well, we are always looking for new platforms to leverage. Let me mention one really quickly, reflective learning. Those of you who are part of our Koa Academy community will know that last week we unleashed a new platform on the kids, which is reflective learning. We're focusing on maths. Reflective learning is a platform where the learners go on, they answer 30 or 40 math questions, and based on their answers, the platform says, right, I know where you've got all your maths gaps, I know what topics you struggle with, and it designs a unique learning path just for that learner that skips topics that they already understand and focuses on topics that they don't understand, and it designs this learning tree that they have to work through and get to the end. And when they get to the end, it gives them another assessment and they complete the other assessment and it looks for gaps again and it reinforces and redesigns a new tree. And every learner is on this unique learning path all the time. We're looking for academic platforms like this. We see this as one of the real key strengths that an online school like Koa Academy can bring to families and parents. This is our expertise. So we're finding these platforms and deploying these platforms effectively in education, and new and better ones are coming up all the time. Next, we've got better marking, better assessment processes. Next, we've got narrative-based reports. Imagine as a parent, if you don't just get a report with your child's maths mark at 61%, but you get a narrative-based report where it unpacks a little bit of why they got 61% based on all of their previous marks, all of the underlying marks that you don't see, comparing it to all marks that have been submitted in maths over the last 20 years. I mean, trends across the country. You could really do some powerful narrative-based reports that give you as the parent meaningful insight into your child's learning that would go beyond what a teacher would be able to generate. Next, career guidance. We've spoken through that one. And finally, Koa Chatbot. One day, guys. Koa Chatbot, where you can go on and have a conversation, ask questions, and the answers will be tailored specifically to Koa. And I'm not talking about one of those chatbots that just drives you crazy and goes in circles and eventually you get so frustrated because you can't talk to a real human. We never want to replace the real human element, especially where that the soft skills are so important. Let's end now with real world relevance. Just want to acknowledge a few things. We've spoken about pitfalls in education when it comes to things like ChatGPT, being biased, giving incorrect answers. But let's take a step even further back and let's think about some risks in terms of AI in general in our society. The first is that they are inherently biased. A good example of this is, did you know that a lot of companies use AI to sift through CVs? So we always think when we submit our CV to a company, a person's going to go through it and they're going to look at it and evaluate it. But actually, the reality is most companies first send all CVs through an AI tool, which then sorts them and presents them with the 10 best CVs. And those are biased. In one absolutely bizarre study, one of the largest companies that does this in the States, it found out that if you referenced your favorite sport as being polo, you had a much higher chance of getting an in-person interview, which is absolutely bizarre, and shows a real bias that's super outdated. And so we need to be teaching in green here. Have a look at the screen. We need to be teaching our kids to think critically about these biases and to spot these biases and not just accept AI results as fact. Next, there's a wealth gap. And most likely, as with any advance in technology, this is first going to widen the wealth gap. That's almost always the case. What we want is for the concertina effect, that as the technology widens the wealth gap, what we want to see over time is that it draws the lower income group higher than they were before. And so over time, we're hoping for a closing of the wealth gap. Now, in that initial stage, as it widens the wealth gap, we really want to be teaching our learners to be empathetic. We're wanting them to think as people, for people in a society. We don't want them to be cold and calculated. One of the things that we've learned in economics, for example, is that people are not always rational because people are people. And so we want to really be leveraging that and harnessing that and getting our kids to think about that. Next, it has already been criminalized and weaponized. So we need smart guardrails for that. We need people who are going to stand up and look for opportunities to guardrail against the criminalization and weaponization of AI. Next, we've got the impact on the job market. We've already seen this. We've got a lot of families who've been impacted by this already, some in positive ways, some in neutral ways, some in very negative ways. And so we know that this is going to change the job market. And for us as Koa, what that reinforces more than anything, please hear me, parents, is the emphasis on soft skills is vital. We know that soft skills are critical for the future success of your child in the workplace, now more than ever, because we don't know what the job market's going to look like 5 years from now, never mind 50 years from now. And so we want to make sure that we're developing young people who are strong and robust, but at the same time, agile and adaptable. Those soft skills are key. And then finally, weak applications. I did want to throw this in there just for parents to be aware of, particularly. If you go onto a lot of social media platforms today, what you'll find is that social media platforms are deploying AI in what I would call a weak application. For example, here there's a social media platform which has deployed a chatbot which can be your child's best friend. So I believe it's Snapchat recently released an AI, and you can befriend this AI and you can tell the AI what you want it to look like, how old you want it to be, how you want it to speak to you. And then you have a friend. You have a friend that anytime you want, you can pick up your phone and you can message your buddy, and your buddy will message you back, and it learns about you, and it learns what you like and what you don't like. And you get this human type interaction with this social media friend. We see great risk in that. I'd really encourage you, if your kids are interested in that sort of engagement, I'd encourage you to go and look up on the Clicked website, KLIKD, and they've done an article specifically on this application of AI, and they unpack some of the reasons why kids are so drawn to this, but also some of the dangers for them in this sort of interaction, and some of the things that have happened to kids already in the online space when it comes to these weak applications. AI is not in the place where I'm comfortable as a principal suggesting that learners engage in that sort of level of relationship. So we want to make sure that we're fostering healthy engagement in the online space and being aware of those sorts of things. So what? Where do we land? We're finishing now. It's already 2:00, and I know many of you will have things to do now at 2:00. But before we head off, I just want to land this by saying, firstly, thank you so much for being here. I believe we all have a responsibility in this. I think that we all have an opportunity in this. But with awesome opportunities come awesome responsibilities. And I don't think that there are any of us who can wash our hands of those responsibilities. We need to be going into this eyes wide open. I say to people when I think about AI, particularly in education, I'm excited with eyes wide open. And I believe that that's true for policymakers, need to be writing policies that are thinking critically. This is shaking up university in particular. And in the next 10 years, we're going to see very different types of assessment at the end of school journeys. Secondly, schools need to be thinking about this critically and taking responsibility. That's why we're very serious about training our teachers, training our educators on that pedagogy piece. Thirdly, for parents, for you, I really think that there's an element of this where I would encourage you to go and engage. That's probably the thing that I would encourage you more than anything else. Wherever you are in terms of your feeling about AI or your experience with AI, engage. Engage with the platforms themselves so that you have an understanding and an appreciation for what sorts of things they do. Go and sign up for accounts. If you don't have a ChatGPT account, go and get one straight after this and have a conversation. If you don't have a Midjourney account, go and sign up for one and start generating images and see what that experience is like. So engage with the platforms, but then engage with your children and engage with us as a school. Where you've got questions, where you've got thoughts, go and have those critical conversations and start to tease out some of these things, all the time focusing on the elements of being human. Why? Because I think that there is good opportunity here, but we need to make sure that we're focused on the things that make us human. We need to be focusing on creativity. We need to be focusing on adaptability, critical thinking, even just common sense. We need to be bringing that to the party to make sure that we leverage the opportunities and guardrail against the pitfalls. Okay. Well, that's the end of my presentation. There are some questions here in the Q&A, which I'll work through, and I'm very happy to stay around for a while. I am going to keep the recording as well. So if you do need to drop off right now, feel free to do so. If you've got a question in the chat and would like to stick around until I get you an answer, do stick around, and I'll work through some of these. But I just want to say thank you so much to everybody who's joined us. Really appreciate your time. Good to see you all.